This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Annie Coleman in St. Louis, Missouri in January 2006. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Chapter 4. Well, 3 or 4 months run along, and it was well into the winter now. I had been to school most all of the time, and could spell and read and write just a little, and could say the multiplication table up to 6 times 7 is 35, and I don't reckon I could ever get any further than that if I was to live forever. I don't take no stock in mathematics anyway. At first I hated the school, but by and by I got so I could stand it. Whenever I got uncommon tired, I played hooky, and the hidin' I got next day done me good and cheered me up. So the longer I went to school, the easier it got to be. I was gettin' sort of used to the widow's ways, too, and they weren't so raspy on me. Livin' in a house and sleepin' in a bed pulled on me pretty tight mostly, but before the cold weather I used to slide out and sleep in the woods sometimes, and so that was a rest to me. I liked the old ways best, but I was gettin' so I liked the new ways, too, a little bit. The widow said I was comin' along slow but sure, and doin' very satisfactory. She said she warn't ashamed of me at all. One mornin' I happened to turn over the salt cellar at breakfast. I reached for some of it as quick as I could to throw over my left shoulder and keep off the bad luck, but Miss Watson was in ahead of me and crossed me off. She says, "Take your hands away, Huckleberry. What a mess you were always makin'." The widow put in a good word for me, but that warn't going to keep off the bad luck. I knowed that well enough. I started out after breakfast, feelin' worried and shaky and wonderin' where it was going to fall on me and what it was going to be. There's ways to keep off some kinds of bad luck, but this wasn't one of them kind, so I never tried to do anything but just poked along low-spirited and on the watch-out. I went down to the front garden and clumb over the stile where you go through the high-board fence. There was an inch of new snow on the ground, and I seen somebody's tracks. They had come up from the quarry and stood around the stile a while, and then went on around the garden fence. It was funny they hadn't come in after standing around so. I couldn't make it out. It was very curious, somehow. I was going to follow around, but I stooped down to look at the tracks first. I didn't notice anything at first, but next I did. There was a cross in the left boot heel, made with big nails, to keep off the devil. I was up in a second and shinnin' down the hill. I looked over my shoulder every now and then, but I didn't see nobody. I was at Judge Thatcher's as quick as I could get there. He said, "Why, my boy, you are all out of breath. Did you come for your interest?" "No, sir," I says. "Is there some for me?" "Oh, yes. A half-yearly is in last night. Over $150, quite a fortune for you. You had better let me invest it along with your 6,000, because if you take it, you'll spend it." "No, sir," I says, "I don't want to spend it. I don't want it at all, nor the 6,000 nother. I want you to take it. I want to give it to you, the 6,000 and all." He looked surprised. He couldn't seem to make it out. He says, "Why, what can you mean, my boy?" I says, "Don't you ask me no questions about it, please. You'll take it, won't you?" He says, "Well, I'm puzzled. Is something the matter?" "Please take it," says I, "and don't ask me nothin'. Then I won't have to tell no lies." He studied a while, and then he says, "Oh, I think I see. You want to sell all your property to me, not give it. That's the correct idea." Then he wrote something on a paper and read it over and says, "There, you see it says, 'for a consideration.' That means I have bought it of you and paid you for it. Here's $1 for you. Now you sign it." So I signed it and left. Miss Watson's nigger Jim had a hairball as big as your fist, which had been took out of the 4th stomach of an ox, and he used to do magic with it. He said there was a spirit inside of it, and it knowed everything. So I went to him that night and told him Pap was here again, for I found his tracks in the snow. What I wanted to know was what he was going to do, and was he going to stay? Jim got out his hairball and said something over it, and then he held it up and dropped it on the floor. It fell pretty solid and only rolled about an inch. Jim tried it again, and then another time, and it acted just the same. Jim got down on his knees and put his ear against it and listened. But it warn't no use. He said it wouldn't talk. He said sometimes it wouldn't talk without money. I told him I had an old slick counterfeit quarter that warn't no good, because the brass showed through the silver a little, and it wouldn't pass nohow even if the brass didn't show, because it was so slick it felt greasy, and so that would tell on it every time. I reckoned I wouldn't say nothing about the dollar I got from the judge. I said it was pretty bad money, but maybe the hairball would take it, because maybe it wouldn't know the difference. Jim smelt it and bit it and rubbed it, and said he would manage so the hairball would think it was good. He said he would split open a raw Irish potato and stick the quarter in between and keep it there all night, and next morning you couldn't see no brass, and it wouldn't feel greasy no more, and so anybody in town would take it in a minute, let alone a hairball. Well, I knowed a potato would do that before, but I had forgot it. Jim put the quarter under the hairball and got down and listened again. This time he said the hairball was all right. He said it would tell my whole fortune if I wanted it to. I says, go on. So the hairball talked to Jim, and Jim told it to me. He says, Yo' old father don't know yet what he's a-gwine to do. Sometimes he spec he'll go away, and den again he spec he'll stay. The best way is to rest easy and let the old man take his own way. Dey's 2 angels hovering round 'bout him. One of 'em is white and shiny, and the other one is black. The white one gets him to go right a little while, then the black one sail in and bust it all up. A body can't tell yet which one gwine to fetch him at the last, but you's all right. You gwine to have considerable trouble in yo' life, and considerable joy. Sometimes you gwine to get hurt, and sometimes you gwine to get sick, but every time you's gwine to get well again. Dey's 2 gals flyin' 'bout you in yo' life. One of 'em's light, and the other one is dark. One is rich, and the other's po'. You's gwine to marry the po' one first, and the rich one by and by. You wants to keep away from the water as much as you kin, and don't run no risk, case it's down in the bills that you's gwine to get hung. When I lit my candle and went up to my room that night, there sat Pap his own self. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. I had shut the door, too. Then I turned around, and there he was. I used to be scared of him all the time, he tanned me so much. I reckoned I was scared now, too, but in a minute I see I was mistaken. That is, after the first jolt, as you may say, when my breath sort of hitched, he being so unexpected. But right away after I see him, I weren't scared of him worth bothering 'bout. He was most 50, and he looked it. His hair was long and tangled and greasy, and hung down, and you could see his eyes shining through like he was behind vines. It was all black, no gray. So was his long, mixed-up whiskers. There warn't no color in his face where his face showed. It was white. Not like another man's white, but a white to make a body sick. A white to make a body's flesh crawl. A tree-toad white. A fish-belly white. As for his clothes, just rags, that was all. He had one ankle resting on the other knee. The boot on that foot was busted, and 2 of his toes stuck through, and he worked them now and then. His hat was layin' on the floor, an old black slouch with the top caved in like a lid. I stood a-lookin' at him. He set there a-lookin' at me, with his chair tilted back a little. I set the candle down. I noticed the window was up, so he had clum in by the shed. He kept a-lookin' me all over. By and by he says, "Starchy clothes, very. You think you're a good deal of a big bug, don't you?" "Maybe I am, maybe I ain't," I says. "Don't you give me none of your lip," says he. "You've put on considerable many frills since I've been away. I'll take you down a peg before I get done with you. You're educated, too, they say. Can read and write. You think you're better'n your father now, don't you, because he can't? I'll take it out of you. Who told you you might meddle with such highfalutin foolishness, hey? Who told you you could?" "The widow. She told me." "The widow, eh? And who told the widow she could put in her shovel about a thing that ain't none of her business?" "Nobody never told her." "Well, I'll learn her how to meddle. And looky here, you drop that school, you hear? I'll learn people to bring up a boy to put on airs over his own father, and let on to be better'n what he is. You let me catch you fooling around that school again, you hear? Your mother couldn't read and she couldn't write nother before she died. None of the family couldn't before they died. I can't, and here you're a-swelling yourself up like this. I ain't the man to stand it, you hear? Say, let me hear you read." I took up a book and begun something about General Washington and the wars. When I'd read about half a minute, he fetched the book a whack with his hand and knocked it across the house. He says, "It's so. You can do it. I had my doubts when you told me. Now looky here. You stop that putting on frills. I won't have it. I'll lay for you, my smarty, and if I catch you about that school, I'll tan you good. First, you know, you'll get religion, too. I never see such a son." He took up a little blue and yaller picture of some cows and a boy, and says, "What's this?" "It's something they give me for learning my lessons good." He tore it up, and says, "I'll give you something better. I'll give you a cowhide." He set there a-mumbling and a-growling a minute, and then he says, "Ain't you a sweet-scented dandy, though? A bed and bedclothes, and a looking-glass, and a piece of carpet on the floor, and your own father got to sleep with the hogs in the tanyard. I never see such a son. I bet I'll take some of these frills out of you before I'm done with you. Why, there ain't no end to your airs. They say you're rich. Hey, how's that?" "They lie, that's how." "Looky here, mind how you talk to me. I'm a-standing about all I can stand now, so don't give me no sass. I've been in town 2 days, and I hain't heard nothing but about you being rich. I heard about it away down the river, too. That's why I came. You get me that money tomorrow. I want it." "I ain't got no money." "It's a lie. Judge Thatcher's got it. You get it. I want it." "I ain't got no money, I tell you. You ask Judge Thatcher, he'll tell you the same." "All right, I'll ask him, and I'll make him pungle, too, or I'll know the reason why. Say, how much you got in your pocket? I want it." "I ain't got only $1, and I want that too." "It don't make no difference what you want it for. You just shell it out." He took it and bit it to see if it was good, and then he said he was going downtown to get some whiskey, said he hadn't had a drink all day. When he had got out on the shed, he put his head in again, and cussed me for putting on frills and trying to be better than him. And when I reckoned he was gone, he come back and put his head in again, and told me to mind about that school, because he was going to lay for me and lick me if I didn't drop that. Next day he was drunk, and he went to Judge Thatcher's and bully-ragged him, and tried to make him give up the money, but he couldn't, and then he swore he'd make the law force him. The judge and the widow went to law to get the court to take me away from him, and let one of them be my guardian. But it was a new judge that had just come, and he didn't know the old man. So he said courts mustn't interfere and separate families if they could help it. Said he'd druther not take a child away from its father. So Judge Thatcher and the widow had to quit on the business. That pleased the old man till he couldn't rest. He said he'd cowhide me till I was black and blue if I didn't raise some money for him. I borrowed $3 from Judge Thatcher, and Pap took it and got drunk and went to blowing around and cussing and whooping and carrying on, and he kept it up all over town with a tin pan till most midnight. Then they jailed him, and next day they had him before court and jailed him again for a week. But he said he was satisfied, said he was the boss of his son, and he'd make it warm for him. When he got out, the new judge said he was going to make a man of him. So he took him to his own house and dressed him up clean and nice and had him to breakfast and dinner and supper with the family, and was just old pie to him, so to speak. And after supper he talked to him about temperance and such things till the old man cried and said he'd been a fool and fooled away his life, but now he was going to turn over a new leaf and be a man nobody wouldn't be ashamed of, and he hoped the judge would help him and not look down on him. The judge said he could hug him for them words, so he cried, and his wife she cried again, Pap said he'd been a man that had always been misunderstood before, and the judge said he believed it. The old man said that what a man wanted that was down was sympathy, and the judge said it was so. So they cried again. And when it was bedtime, the old man rose up and held out his hand and says, "Look at it, gentlemen and ladies all. Take a hold of it, shake it. There's a hand that was the hand of a hog, but it ain't so no more. It's the hand of a man that started in on a new life, and'll die before he'll go back. You mark them words, don't forget I said them. It's a clean hand now, shake it. Don't be afeard." So they shook it one after the other all around and cried. The judge's wife, she kissed it. Then the old man, he signed a pledge, made his mark. The judge said it was the holiest time on record, or something like that. Then they tucked the old man into a beautiful room, which was the spare room, and in the night sometime he got powerful thirsty, and clumb out onto the porch roof and slid down a stanchion, and traded his new coat for a jug of 40 rod, and clumb back again and had a good old time. And towards daylight he crawled out again, drunk as a fiddler, and rolled off the porch and broke his left arm in 2 places, and was most froze to death when somebody found him after sun-up. And when they come to look at that spare room, they had to take soundings before they could navigate it. The judge, he felt kind of sore. He said he reckoned a body could reform the old man with a shotgun, maybe, but he didn't know no other way. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. Well, pretty soon the old man was up and around again, and then he went for Judge Thatcher in the courts to make him give up that money, and he went for me, too, for not stopping school. He catched me a couple of times and thrashed me, but I went to school just the same, and dodged him or outrun him most of the time. I didn't want to go to school much before, but I reckoned I'd go now to spite Pap. That law trial was a slow business. Appeared like they weren't ever going to get started on it. So every now and then I'd borrow $2 or $3 off of the judge for him, to keep from getting a cowhiding. Every time he got money he got drunk, and every time he got drunk he raised Cain around town, and every time he raised Cain he got jailed. He was just suited. This kind of thing was right in his line. He got to hanging around the widows too much, and so she told him at last that if he didn't quit using around there, she would make trouble for him. Well, wasn't he mad? He said he would show who was Huck Finn's boss. So he watched out for me one day in the spring and catched me, and took me up the river about 3 miles in a skiff, and crossed over to the Illinois shore, where it was woody and there weren't no houses but an old log hut in a place where the timber was so thick you couldn't find it if you didn't know where it was. He kept me with him all the time, and I never got a chance to run off. We lived in that old cabin, and he always locked the door and put the key under his head nights. He had a gun which he had stole, I reckon, and we fished and hunted, and that was what we lived on. Every little while he locked me in and went down to the store 3 miles to the ferry, and traded fish and game for whiskey, and fetched it home and got drunk and had a good time, and licked me. The widow, she found out where I was by and by, and she sent a man over to try to get a hold of me, but Pap drove him off with a gun, and it warn't long after that till I was used to being where I was and liked it, all but the cowhide part. It was kind of lazy and jolly, layin' off comfortable all day, smoking and fishing, and no books nor study. 2 months or more run along, and my clothes got to be all rags and dirt, and I didn't see how I'd ever got to like it so well at the widow's, where you had to wash and eat on a plate and comb up and go to bed and get up regular and be forever bothering over a book, and have old Miss Watson pecking at you all the time. I didn't want to go back no more. I had stopped cussin' because the widow didn't like it, but now I took to it again because Pap hadn't no objections. It was pretty good times up in the woods there, take it all around. But by and by, Pap got too handy with his hickory, and I couldn't stand it. I was all over welts. He got to going away so much, too, and locking me in. Once he locked me in and was gone 3 days. It was dreadful lonesome. I judged he had drowned, and I wasn't ever going to get out any more. I was scared. I made up my mind I would fix up some way to leave there. I had tried to get out of that cabin many a time, but I couldn't find no way. There warn't a window to it big enough for a dog to get through. I couldn't get up the chimbley. It was too narrow. The door was thick, solid oak slabs. Pap was pretty careful not to leave a knife or anything in the cabin when he was away. I reckon I had hunted the place over as much as 100 times. Well, I was most all the time at it because it was about the only way to put in the time. But this time I found something at last. I found an old rusty wood saw without any handle. It was laid in between a rafter and the clapboards of the roof. I greased it up and went to work. There was an old horse blanket nailed against the logs at the far end of the cabin behind the table to keep the wind from blowing through the chinks and putting the candle out. I got under the table and raised the blanket and went to work to saw a section of the big bottom log out, big enough to let me through. Well, it was a good long job, but I was getting towards the end of it when I heard Pap's gun in the woods. I got rid of the signs of my work and dropped the blanket and hid my saw, and pretty soon Pap came in. Pap warn't in a good humor, so he was his natural self. He said he was downtown and everything was going wrong. His lawyer said he reckoned he would win his lawsuit and get the money if they ever got started on the trial. But then there was ways to put it off a long time, and Judge Thatcher knowed how to do it. And he said people allowed there be another trial to get me away from him and give me to the widow for my guardian, and they guessed it would win this time. This shook me up considerable, because I didn't want to go back to the widow's any more and be so cramped up and civilized, as they called it. Then the old man got to cussin' and cussed everything and everybody he could think of, and then cussed them all over again to make sure he hadn't skipped any, and after that he polished off with a kind of a general cuss all around, including a considerable parcel of people which he didn't know the names of, and so called them what's-his-name when he got to them, and went right along with his cussin'. He said he would like to see the widow get me. He said he would watch out, and if they tried to come any such game on him, he knowed of a place 6 or 7 mile off to stow me in, where they might hunt till they dropped and they couldn't find me. That made me pretty uneasy again, but only for a minute. I reckoned he wouldn't stay on hand till he got that chance. The old man made me go to the skiff and fetch the things he had got. There was a 50-pound sack of cornmeal, and a side of bacon, ammunition, and a 4-gallon jug of whiskey, and an old book and 2 newspapers for wadding, besides some tow. I toted up a load and went back and sit down on the bow of the skiff to rest. I thought it all over, and I reckoned I would walk off with a gun and some lines and take to the woods when I run away. I guessed I wouldn't stay in one place, but just tramp right across country, mostly night times, and hunt and fish to keep alive, and so get so far away that the old man nor the widow couldn't ever find me any more. I judged I would saw out and leave that night if Pap got drunk enough, and I reckoned he would. I got so full of it I didn't notice how long I was staying till the old man hollered and asked me whether I was asleep or drownded. I got the things all up to the cabin, and then it was about dark. While I was cooking supper, the old man took a swig or two and got sort of warmed up and went to ripping again. He had been drunk over in town and laid in the gutter all night, and he was a sight to look at. A body would have thought he was Adam. He was just all mud. Whenever his liquor begun to work, he most always went for the government. This time he says, "Call this a government? Why, just look at it and see what it's like. Here's the law standing ready to take a man's son away from him, a man's own son, which he has had all the trouble and all the anxiety and all the expense of raising. Yes, just as that man has got that son raised at last, and ready to go to work and begin to do something for him and give him a rest, the law up and goes for him. And they call that government. That ain't all, nuther. The law backs that old Judge Thatcher up and helps him to keep me out of my property. Here's what the law does. The law takes a man worth $6,000 and upwards and jams him into an old trap of cabin like this and lets him go round in clothes that ain't fitting for a hog. They call that government. A man can't get his rights in a government like this. Sometimes I've a mighty notion to just leave the country for good and all. Yes, and I told him so. I told old Thatcher so to his face. Lots of 'em heard me and can tell what I said. Says I, for 2 cents I'd leave the blamed country and never come near it again. Them's the very words. I says, look at my hat, if you call it a hat, but the lid raises up and the rest of it goes down till it's below my chin, and then it ain't rightly a hat at all, but more like my head was shoved up through a gentle stovepipe. Look at it, I says. Such a hat for me to wear! One of the wealthiest men in this town if I could get my rights. Oh, yes, this is a wonderful government. Wonderful. Why, looky here. There was a free nigger there from Ohio, a mulatto, most as white as any man. He had the whitest shirt on you ever see, too, and the shiniest hat, and there ain't a man in that town that's got as fine clothes as what he had, and he had a gold watch and chain and a silver-headed cane, the awfullest old gray-headed nabob in the state. And what do you think? They said he was a professor in a college, and could talk all kinds of languages and knowed everything. And that ain't the worst. They said he could vote when he was at home. Well, that let me out. Thinks I, what is the country a-comin' to? It was 'lection day, and I was just about to go and vote myself if I warn't too drunk to get there. But when they told me there was a state in this country where they'd let that nigger vote, I drawed out. I says I'll never vote again. Them's the very words I said. They all heard me. And the country may rot for all me. I'll never vote again as long as I live. And to see the cool way of that nigger, why, he wouldn't have given me the road if I hadn't shoved him out of the way. I says to the people, why ain't this nigger put up at auction and sold? That's what I want to know. And what do you reckon they said? Why, they said he couldn't be sold till he'd been in the state 6 months, and he hadn't been there that long yet. There now, that's a specimen. They call that a government that can't sell a free nigger till he's been in the state 6 months. Here's a government that calls itself a government, and lets it on to be a government, and thinks it is a government, and yet it's got to sit stock still for 6 whole months before it can get a hold of a prowling, thieving, infernal, white-shirted free nigger, and... Pap was a-going on so he never noticed where his old Limberlegs was taking him to. So he went head over heels over the tub of salt pork, and barked both shins, and the rest of his speech was all the hottest kind of language, mostly huv at the nigger and the government, though he give the tub some, too, while along here and there. He hopped around the cabin considerable, first on one leg and then on the other, holding first one shin and then the other one, and at last he let out with his left foot all of a sudden and fetched the tub a rattling kick. But it warn't a good judgment, because that was the boot that had a couple of his toes leaking out of the front end of it. So now he raised a howl that fairly made a body's hair raise, and down he went in the dirt, and rolled there, and held his toes, and the cussin' he done then laid over anything he had ever done previous. He said so his own self afterwards. He had heard old Soberry Hagan in his best days, and he said it laid over him, too, but I reckon that was sort of piling it on, maybe. After supper, Pap took the jug, and said he had enough whiskey there for 2 drunks and 1 delirium tremens. That was always his word. I judged he'd be blind drunk in about an hour, and then I would steal the key or saw myself out one or the other. He drank and tumbled down on his blankets by and by. But luck didn't run my way. He didn't go sound asleep, but was uneasy. He groaned and moaned and thrashed round this way and that for a long time. At last I got so sleepy I couldn't keep my eyes open, all I could do, and so before I knowed what I was about, I was sound asleep, and the candle burning. I don't know how long I was asleep, but all of a sudden there was an awful scream, and I was up. There was Pap looking wild, and skipping around every which way and yelling about snakes. He said they was crawling up his legs, and then he would give a jump and scream and say one had bit him on the cheek, but I couldn't see no snakes. He started and run around and round the cabin hollering, take him off, he's biting me on the neck." I never see a man look so wild in the eyes. Pretty soon he was all fagged out and fell down panting. Then he rolled over and over wonderful fast, kicking things every which way and striking and grabbing at the air with his hands, and screaming and saying there was devils a-hold of him. He wore out by and by, and laid still a while, moaning. Then he laid stiller, and didn't make a sound. I could hear the owls and the wolves away off in the woods, and it seemed terrible still. He was layin' over by the corner. By and by he raised up part way and listened, with his head to one side. He says very low, "Tramp, tramp, tramp, that's the dead. Tramp, 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 they're coming after me, but I won't go. Oh, they're here. Don't touch me, don't! Hands off! They're cold, let go. Oh, let a poor devil alone." Then he went down on all fours and crawled off, begging them to let him alone, and he rolled himself up in his blanket and wallowed in under the old pine table, still a-beggin', and then he went to cryin'. I could hear him through the blanket. By and by, he rolled out and jumped up on his feet lookin' wild, and he see me and went for me. He chased me round and round the place with a clasp knife, callin' me the angel of death, and sayin' he would kill me, and then I couldn't come for him no more. I begged and told him I was only Huck, but he laughed such a screechy laugh, and roared and cussed and kept on chasing me up. Once, when I turned short and dodged under his arm, he made a grab and got me by the jacket between my shoulders, and I thought I was gone, but I slid out of the jacket quick as lightning and saved myself. Pretty soon he was all tired out, and dropped down with his back against the door, and said he would rest a minute and then kill me. He put his knife under him and said he would sleep and get strong, and then he would see who was who. So he dozed off pretty soon. By and by, I got the old split-bottom chair and clumb up as easy as I could not to make any noise, and got down the gun. I slipped the ramrod down it to make sure it was loaded, then I laid it across the turnip barrel, pointing towards Pap, and sat down behind it to wait for him to stir. And how slow and still did the time drag along. End of chapter 6.